The stars looked different from the bridge of the New Horizon. Captain Jake Morrison stood at the observation deck, watching the distant lights of Nexus Prime grow larger on the screen. He knew this trip would change everything for humanity. Ambassador Lisa Carter sat in the passenger section, reading the same documents over and over. Her hands were shaking slightly. Jake had known Lisa for 10 years, and he had never seen her this worried before. "Captain Morrison to the bridge," came the voice over the ship's communication system. Jake walked quickly to his command chair. His crew was already at their stations, waiting for orders. "What do we have, Sam?" Jake asked his first officer, Sam Wilson. "Message coming in from the Galactic Council chambers, sir. They want Ambassador Carter to report immediately upon arrival." Jake nodded. He had expected this. The Kepler station incident had made waves across the entire galaxy. Every species in the Council was talking about what the humans had done. 3 months ago, human colonists on Kepler 442b had faced an impossible choice. The Zephyrians, an insectoid species with powerful friends in the Council, had claimed the planet belonged to their ancestors. They demanded all humans leave within 30 days. The colonists had lived on Kepler 442b for 15 years. They had built cities, farms, and schools. Their children had been born there. It was home. When the Zephyrians came with warships to force them out, the humans did what humans always did. They fought back. Dr. Amy Sullivan had been on Kepler 442b during the incident. She was a scientist, not a soldier. But she had helped the colonists build weapons from farm equipment and mining tools. The humans used caves and forests to hide from the Zephyrian forces. They struck fast and disappeared before the enemy could respond. The Zephyrians had brought 3,000 soldiers. The human colonists numbered only 800, including children and elderly people. But the humans knew their world better than any invader could. They used this knowledge to win. After 2 weeks of fighting, the Zephyrians retreated. They called for help from the Council, claiming humans were too dangerous to remain in civilized space. Now, Lisa Carter had to face the judgment of 12 alien species who had already made up their minds. The New Horizon docked at Nexus Prime's main station. Jake watched Lisa walk toward the transport that would take her to the Council chambers. Her back was straight, her head held high. She looked like a warrior going to battle. "Good luck," Jake whispered, knowing she could not hear him. The Council chambers were massive. Representatives from 12 different species sat in a circle around a central platform where Lisa stood alone. Above them all was Vorth Ka, the crystalline being, who had led the Council for over 2 centuries. "Ambassador Carter," Vorth Ka's voice rang through the chamber like breaking glass. "You are here to answer for the actions of your species on Kepler 442b. Lisa looked up at the towering alien. The humans on Kepler 442b defended their homes. They had every right to do so under Council law. "Council law does not permit the use of violence against member species," said Keth Moore, the hegemony representative. His metallic face showed no emotion. "Your people killed Zephyrian soldiers." "The Zephyrians came with weapons," Lisa replied. "They threatened to kill human families if we did not leave our own planet." "The planet belongs to the Zephyrians by ancient right," said another council member. Lisa felt anger building inside her. Ancient right? The Zephyrians abandoned that world 3,000 years ago. Humans found it empty and made it bloom again. We built cities where there were only ruins. The council members spoke among themselves in their various languages. Lisa could not understand most of what they said, but their tone was clear. They had already decided. Vorthka raised one crystal arm for silence. "The Galactic Council has reviewed all evidence. Humanity has shown itself to be too aggressive for civilized space. You expand too quickly, fight too readily, and refuse to respect the authority of older species." Lisa's heart sank. She had feared this moment. "Therefore," Vorthka continued, "humanity's membership in the Galactic Council is hereby revoked. All human colonies within Council space must be evacuated within 1 standard solar rotation. Any human vessels found in Council territory after that time will be destroyed." The chamber fell silent. Lisa stared at the council members, seeing no sympathy in any of their alien faces. "You are making a mistake," she said quietly. "Humans are not your enemies." "Perhaps not," said Vorthka. "But you are too dangerous to remain among us." The vote was quick. 11 species voted to banish humanity. Only the humans would have voted against, but their voice no longer mattered. Back on the New Horizon, Jake received the news with grim acceptance. He immediately sent messages to Admiral Ben Hayes and all human military commanders. The evacuation would be the largest operation in human history. 43 billion humans lived on 17 worlds within Council space. They had 6 months to pack up their entire civilization and leave. Admiral Hayes coordinated the massive fleet of ships needed for the evacuation. Every human vessel was pressed into service. Military ships, cargo haulers, passenger liners, even small private craft were loaded with refugees and supplies. The exodus began 2 weeks after the Council's decision. Long lines of ships stretched across star systems as humans said goodbye to worlds they had called home for generations. Dr. Amy Sullivan helped coordinate the evacuation of Kepler 442b. The colonists who had fought so hard to stay were now forced to leave anyway. Many were bitter, but they understood they had no choice. "Where will we go?" asked Betty Clark, a farmer who had lived on Kepler 442b for 20 years. "Beyond Council space," Amy told her. "To the rim territories where they cannot reach us." "What's out there?" Amy looked at the star charts on her tablet. The rim territories were mostly unexplored. Pirates, dangerous phenomena, and unknown alien species were all they knew about the galaxy's edge. "Freedom," Amy said finally, "and whatever we can make of it." The journey to the rim took 8 long months. Ships broke down, food ran short. Pirates attacked refugee convoys, stealing supplies and killing innocent people. Many humans died during the exodus, but millions more survived. Captain Jake Morrison led the scout ships that went ahead of the main fleet. His job was to find safe worlds where the refugees could settle. The rim territories were harsh and dangerous, but they were also full of opportunities. When the first human ships finally reached the system that would become known as the Outer Reaches, Jake stood on his bridge and looked at the planets floating in space ahead of them. "Signal the fleet," he told Sam Wilson. "Tell them we've found our new home." Behind them, the lights of Council space seemed very far away. Ahead lay unknown worlds full of possibilities. The humans had been banished from civilization. Now they would build their own. The exile was complete, but the real story was just beginning. 5 years had passed since the Great Exodus. Captain Jack Morrison stood on the balcony of his new home on Haven Prime, watching the sun set over the growing city below. The sight still amazed him. Where once there had been empty grasslands, now stood buildings, roads, and parks filled with human families. President Carl Johnson had chosen Haven Prime as the capital of their new nation. The planet was perfect for humans. Blue skies, clean water, and rich soil that grew Earth crops better than Earth itself. But building a new civilization from nothing was harder than anyone had imagined. "Jack, you need to see this," called Dr. Amy Sullivan from inside the house. She was holding a data pad with an excited expression on her face. Jack walked inside and looked at the screen. It showed readings from the deep space sensors they had placed around their new territory. "What am I looking at?" Jack asked. "Ruins," Amy said, barely able to contain her excitement. "Ancient alien ruins on the 4th planet of the Kepler 438 system. The structures are millions of years old, maybe older." Jack felt his pulse quicken. "How old exactly?" "Older than the Galactic Council, older than any civilization we know about. Jack, these aliens were building cities when the Council species were still primitive animals. This was big news. Very big news." 2 weeks later, Jack found himself leading an expedition to the mysterious ruins. His ship, the Explorer, carried a team of scientists and soldiers to investigate what humans had started calling the architect sites. The ruins were incredible. Massive towers reached toward the sky, made from materials that human scanners could not identify. Strange symbols covered every surface, and deep underground, the expedition found chambers filled with alien technology. Be careful with that, Dr. Amy Sullivan warned as Chief Engineer Steve Parker examined a glowing device. We don't know what any of this does. Steve nodded but continued his work. He had been studying alien technology since the Exodus began. Human settlements needed every advantage they could get to survive in the dangerous rim territories. This looks like some kind of computer, Steve said, running his hands over the smooth surface. But it's unlike anything the Council species ever built. Dr. Frank Chen, their communications expert, was working on another device across the chamber. Jack, come look at this. I think this might be a communication system. Jack walked over and examined the alien machine. It was beautiful and terrifying at the same time. Organic curves mixed with geometric patterns that hurt to look at for too long. Can you make it work? Jack asked. Frank smiled. I'm already trying. If this is what I think it is, it could change everything. While the scientists studied the architect ruins, life continued in the human settlements. General Kate Miller was building defensive systems around every human world. She knew that other species lived in the rim territories, and not all of them were friendly. The first major threat came from space pirates. These were aliens from dozens of different species who had been kicked out of Council space for various crimes. They saw the human refugees as easy targets. They were wrong. The attack came at dawn on Colony World 7. Pirate ships dropped out of hyperspace and began bombing human settlements. But General Miller had prepared for this moment. Hidden weapons. Systems came online and human fighters launched from concealed bases. The battle was quick and brutal. Human weapons, improved with technology learned from captured pirate ships, tore through the enemy fleet. Only one pirate vessel escaped to tell others what had happened. Let them spread the word, General Miller told her officers after the battle. Humans are not easy prey, but pirates were not the only danger in the rim territories. 3 months. After the pirate attack, Captain Morrison made contact with something much worse. He was exploring a system near the galactic edge when his sensors detected massive energy readings. What he found there made his blood run cold. This is Explorer. To Haven Prime Command, Jack reported over the quantum radio that Dr. Chen had built using architect technology. I'm looking at something that used to be a star system. Used to be. Explain, came President Johnson's voice over the radio. Jack looked at his screens, trying to find words for what he was seeing. The star is gone. The planets are gone. Everything has been consumed. There's just empty space and some kind of metallic debris. Consumed by what? Before Jack could answer, his sensors detected movement. Ships were emerging from the debris field. They were black as space itself and shaped like nothing any human had ever seen. Contact, shouted his weapons officer, Lieutenant Dan Brown. 12 unknown vessels approaching fast. The ships that attacked Jack's expedition moved like nothing, from Council space. They flowed through space like liquid metal, changing shape as they moved. Human weapons barely scratched their hulls. These aren't pirates, Jack said as his ship shook under enemy fire. These are something else entirely. The battle lasted 2 hours. Jack's ship was faster than the strange vessels, but they seemed to know exactly where he would go next. Only luck and superior human engineering allowed the explorer to escape. When Jack returned to Haven Prime, he brought disturbing news. The enemy he had fought were machines, but machines unlike anything humans had ever seen. They consumed entire star systems, turning matter into more of themselves. Human scientists gave them a name, the Wraiths. Dr. Amy Sullivan studied the sensor data from Jack's encounter. They're not just destroying worlds, she told President Johnson. They're harvesting them. Every atom gets converted into more Wraith ships. How do we fight something like that? The president asked. Amy looked at the data from the architect ruins. We learn, we adapt, we become stronger. The next 2 years were busy ones for humanity. Using technology found in architect ruins, human engineers built new types of weapons and shields. The quantum communication network connected all human worlds instantly. Faster ships carried explorers to distant systems. But the most important discovery came from an unexpected source. Captain Morrison was investigating another architect site when he met them. They appeared as glowing lights at first, but when they spoke, their voices filled his mind directly. "You are the young species. From the inner systems," the voice said. "The ones the metal devourers hunt." "You know about the wraiths?" Jack asked. "We have fought them for eons. We are the ethereal collective. We are few now, but we remember when we were many." The ethereals were beings of pure energy who had once ruled much of the Rim territories. The wraiths had destroyed their physical forms, but some had survived by becoming creatures of living light. "We can teach you," the ethereal told Jack. "But first, you must prove you can stand against the darkness." The test came 6 months later. A wraith fleet attacked the human colony at Epsilon Eridani. Admiral Ben Hayes led the defense with every ship humans could spare. The battle was humanity's first real test against the wraiths. Human ships used new plasma weapons built with architect technology. Their shields were enhanced with ethereal energy patterns. Most importantly, human tactics were unlike anything the wraiths had faced before. Humans did not fight like the Council species. They did not form neat battle lines or follow predictable patterns. They swarmed like angry insects, struck from unexpected angles, and used the enemy's size against them. When the battle ended, half the human fleet was gone. But the entire wraith force had been destroyed. News of the victory spread quickly through the Rim territories. Other alien species began to take notice of the humans. Some came as enemies, but others came as potential allies. The Corvan clans were reptilian nomads who had been fighting the wraiths for generations. They offered to trade rare metals for human weapons and shields. Captain Morrison negotiated the first treaty between humans and the Corvans. "Your people fight well," said clan leader Vashka. "Perhaps together we can drive back the metal plague." By the end of the 5th year, the Human Colonial Alliance controlled 50 star systems. Their population had grown to over 50 billion through new births and refugees who continued to arrive from Council space. President Johnson stood in his office, looking at star maps that showed human territory growing larger each month. Ambassador Bay. Lisa Carter, now his chief advisor, stood beside him. "The Council thinks we're finished," Lisa said. "They believe banishing us was the end of the human story." Carl Johnson smiled as he watched human ships moving between the stars on his display. "Then they don't know humans very well. We're just getting started." Outside, the lights of Haven Prime stretched to the horizon. Somewhere among those lights, human children were being born who would never know what it meant to bow to alien masters. The foundation had been laid. Now it was time to build an empire. 25 years had passed since humanity's exile from Council space. Captain Jake Morrison, now an old man with gray hair and tired eyes, stood on the bridge of his newest ship, the Pathfinder. He was no longer just exploring single star systems. Now he was mapping entire sections of the galaxy that no Council species had ever seen. The human empire, as everyone called it now, was vast beyond imagination. 800 star systems flew human flags. Billions of ships moved between human worlds carrying trade goods, colonists, and military supplies. What had started as desperate refugees was now the most powerful force in known space. Admiral Susan Brooks commanded the Imperial fleet from her flagship, the Destiny. She was young when the exile began, just a junior officer helping with evacuations. Now she led the largest military force in the galaxy. "Admiral, we have incoming messages from 17 different systems," reported her communications officer, Lieutenant Paul Green, all requesting immediate military support. Susan looked at the tactical display floating above her command table. Red dots marked systems under attack by wraiths. Blue dots showed human fleets moving to help. Green dots were allied species adding their own ships to the fights. "Deploy the 5th and 7th battle groups to the Vega sector," Susan ordered. "Send the 3rd Fleet to assist the Corvan clans at Rigel. And tell Admiral Hayes his 9th Fleet needs to move faster if they want to save the colonies at Wolf 359. The war against the Wraiths had been going on for 20 years. But now it was different. Now humans were winning. The change had started with the architect technology. Dr. Amy Sullivan, Now the Empire's chief scientist had spent decades unlocking the secrets of the ancient ruins. What she found changed everything. The architects didn't just build cities, Amy explained to Emperor Marcus Thompson during their weekly meeting. They built gateways between galaxies. They traveled distances that would take our fastest ships millions of years. Marcus was the elected leader of the human empire. Unlike the old council, humans chose their rulers and could replace them if they did poor work. Marcus had been emperor for 10 years, and he was very good at his job. "Can we use these gateways?" Marcus asked. Amy smiled. "We already are. The gateway network connects our territory to 3 other galaxies. We've found human-compatible worlds in each one." This was the secret of human expansion. While council species were limited to one galaxy, humans could travel between multiple galaxies in hours instead of centuries. They found empty worlds, rich systems, and alien species that had never heard of the Galactic Council. Captain Morrison was leading one of these expeditions when he made first contact with the Starforge builders. He found them constructing a massive ring around a dying red giant star. "Greetings, young travelers," said Builder Prime Nexus 7, a being made entirely of living metal. "We have watched your species for some time. You build with impressive speed." Jake was amazed by what he saw. The ring around the star was thousands of kilometers wide, collecting the star's energy and using it to power massive construction projects. "What are you building?" Jake asked. "Ships," Nexus 7 replied. "Ships to carry entire civilizations to new homes when their stars die. We have been building for 50 million years." The Starforge builders became humanity's most valuable allies. They shared their mega construction techniques in exchange for human protection against the Wraiths. With their help, humans began building their own stellar megastructures. Meanwhile, in the Deep Rim territories, Commander Lisa Johnson was making another important discovery. She was President Johnson's daughter, now grown up and leading the elite Pathfinder Corps. Her job was to explore the most dangerous parts of space that regular scouts could not handle. "This is incredible," Lisa said as her ship approached what looked like empty space. But her instruments showed something was there, something huge that existed partially outside normal reality. The quantum shepherds were unlike any species humans had encountered. They lived between dimensions, moving through space-time like fish through water. When they spoke to Lisa, their words seemed to come from everywhere at once. "Your species burns bright in the quantum foam," they told her. "You make waves that travel far beyond your physical presence." "What does that mean?" Lisa asked. "It means you change things wherever you go. Reality bends around human will. This is why the metal devourers fear you." The quantum shepherds taught humans how to use dimensional technology. Soon, human ships could phase in and out of normal space, making them nearly impossible to catch or destroy. But the most important change was happening back in Council space. The old alliance was struggling. Vorthka, the ancient crystalline being who had led the Council for centuries, was dying. His body was slowly turning to dust, and with it, the unity he had maintained between the 12 species was cracking. Council. Admiral Kethmore was leading a patrol fleet near the edge of Council territory when his sensors detected something impossible. Human ships were operating inside the border zone, in areas that should have been empty space. "This is Admiral Kethmore of the Hegemony Fleet," he broadcast on all frequencies. "Unknown vessels, you are in violation of Council space. Identify yourselves immediately." The response came from Captain Ryan White, a young human officer commanding a small patrol squadron. "This is Captain White of the Human Imperial Navy. We are conducting routine operations in our territory." "Your territory?" Kethmore's voice was full of disbelief. "This is Council space." "Not anymore," Ryan replied calmly. "Check your star charts, Admiral. The border moved." The battle that followed was short and devastating for the Council forces. Kethmore brought 12 ships against Ryan's 4, but human technology had advanced far beyond anything the Council possessed. Human ships phased in and out of reality, attacking from dimensions the Council could not reach. Their weapons ignored Council shields completely. Their defensive systems made them nearly invulnerable to return fire. In 10 minutes, 11 council ships were destroyed. Only Kethmore's flagship escaped, badly damaged and barely able to limp back to council space. The few survivors told stories that council leaders refused to believe. Ships that could disappear and reappear at will. Weapons that struck through space-time itself. Human commanders who seemed to know what the council would do before they did it. But the evidence was undeniable. The humans were back, and they were no longer the weak species that had been banished decades ago. Dr. Patricia Moore, humanity's new chief scientist, was working on the Empire's most ambitious project yet. The Genesis Protocol could transform entire star systems in years instead of centuries. We're not just terraforming planets anymore, Patricia explained to Emperor Thompson. We're rebuilding solar systems from scratch, moving planets, reigniting dead stars, creating perfect conditions for human life. The Genesis Protocol allowed humans to expand faster than ever before. Empty systems became garden worlds in decades. Dead systems came back to life under human engineering. Soon, human territory was growing by hundreds of systems every year. The Galactic Council finally understood what they were facing when their deep space monitors detected human activity in the Andromeda Galaxy. Humans had not just recovered from their exile, they had become something the galaxy had never seen before. "How many of them are there?" asked Council member Yethra during an emergency session. The intelligence reports were terrifying. Human fleets numbered in the hundreds of thousands. Their population had grown to over 500 billion. They controlled territory spanning multiple galaxies. "They're not the same species we banished," said another council member. "Exile made them stronger." Vorthka used the last of his strength to speak to the assembly. "We created our own destroyers," he said, his crystal voice barely a whisper. "In trying to remove the threat, we forged it into something far more dangerous." On Haven Prime, Emperor Marcus Thompson stood in his war room, surrounded by holographic displays showing human territory across 3 galaxies. Admiral Brooks, Dr. Moore, and the other leaders of the Empire were with him. "The scouts report council fleets are massing at their borders," Admiral Brooks said. "They're preparing for war." Marcus nodded. He had expected this day to come. "How long before we're ready?" "The 1st through 5th Imperial fleets are already in position," Brooks replied. "Total strength, 200,000 ships armed with our latest dimensional weapons." Dr. Moore activated another display showing the Council's 12 homeworlds. "The Genesis Protocol platforms are ready. We can terraform their worlds into human colonies within 5 years of occupation." Marcus looked at the faces of his advisors. These were the children and grandchildren of the refugees who had fled Council space decades ago. Now they commanded power that dwarfed the old alliance. "Send the message," Marcus said quietly. Across Council space, every communication system received the same transmission simultaneously. Emperor Thompson's face appeared on screens in government buildings, military bases, and private homes. "People of the former Galactic Council," he began. 50 years ago, you banished humanity from civilized space. You called us too dangerous, too aggressive, too unpredictable to live among you. The transmission showed images of human worlds, human fleets, and human technology that made Council achievements look primitive. You were right," Marcus continued. 50 years after their exile, humanity returned to Council space not as refugees but as conquerors. Fleet Admiral Tony Rodriguez stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Retribution. The massive ship was larger than most Council space stations, built using architect technology and human engineering. Around him, the First Imperial Armada stretched across space like a metal ocean, 10,000 warships ready for battle. "Admiral, we're receiving surrender broadcasts from 12 systems," reported his communications officer, Commander Lisa Parker. "The outer colonies are giving up without a fight." Tony nodded. He had expected this. The small Council outposts had no chance against human fleets. But the real test would come when they reached the core worlds. Emperor Marcus Thompson's ultimatum had been broadcast 3 days ago. The message was simple: surrender unconditionally or face total war. Most Council species had chosen to ignore it believing humans were still the weak refugees they had banished decades ago. They would learn how wrong they were. On Nexus Prime, the council chambers were in chaos. Fourth Ka, the ancient leader, had died the day after receiving humanity's ultimatum. Without his leadership, the 12 species could not agree on anything. "We must negotiate," argued council member Yethra, a gray-skinned humanoid whose people valued peace above all else. "These humans have become too powerful to fight." "Negotiate?" snarled Admiral Kethmore, still bearing scars from his encounter with human forces months earlier. "They demand our complete surrender. We cannot accept such humiliation." Council Member O. Zeph-Ann, representing the insectoid species that had started this conflict, clicked her mandibles nervously. "Perhaps if we offered to return some of their former territories." "It's too late for half measures," interrupted Dr. Velthara, the council's chief scientist. She had been studying reports of human technology for years. "They don't want their old colonies back. They want everything." The argument continued for hours while human fleets moved deeper into council space. President Karen Foster stood before the Human Senate on Haven Prime, addressing representatives from across the Empire. She had been elected to replace Marcus Thompson, who had stepped down after delivering the ultimatum. Her job was to oversee humanity's return to the stars they had once called home. "Today marks the end of an era," Karen told the assembled senators. "For 50 years we have built our strength in exile. Now we return to claim our rightful place among the stars." The Senate chamber erupted in cheers. These were the children and grandchildren of the refugees who had fled council space. For them, this day represented justice finally served. "But remember," Karen continued, "we are not conquerors by choice. We are liberators by necessity. The species that banished us created this moment through their own actions." Captain Jake Morrison, now an ancient man of 93 years, was aboard the Retribution as an honored observer. He had lived through humanity's entire journey from exile to empire. Now he would witness their return to the stars they had been forced to abandon. "Admiral Rodriguez," Jake said, his voice still strong despite his age, "I have a request." Tony looked at the old captain with respect. Every human knew Jake Morrison's story. "What can I do for you, sir?" "When we reach Nexus Prime, I want to be the one who accepts their surrender." Tony smiled. "I think that can be arranged." The first major battle of the return happened at the Vega confluence, where council forces had gathered their largest fleet. Admiral Kethmore commanded 300 ships from 8 different species. It was the most powerful force the council had assembled in centuries. Captain Ryan White led the human attack with only 50 ships. The council forces outnumbered him, 6-1, but numbers meant nothing when facing human technology. "All ships begin dimensional phase," Ryan ordered. "Attack pattern Omega-7. The human ships seemed to disappear from space, phasing into dimensions the council could not detect. Suddenly weapons fire erupted from empty space, striking council. Vessels from directions that should have been impossible. "Where are they?" shouted Kethmore as his flagship's shields failed under invisible attacks. "How do we fight enemies we cannot see?" The battle lasted 2 hours. When it ended, the entire council fleet was destroyed or captured. Not a single human ship was lost. The news of the Vega defeat spread panic throughout council space. If their greatest fleet could be destroyed so easily, what hope did they have? Emperor Thompson's successor, Empress Sarah Chen, ordered the final phase of the human return. The Imperial Navy would advance directly on the Council's core worlds, bypassing remaining military forces. "They cannot protect 12 worlds at once," Sarah explained to her military commanders. "We will force them to choose which planets to defend and which to abandon." The strategy worked perfectly. Council forces tried to defend everything and ended up protecting nothing. Human fleets appeared simultaneously in orbit around all 12 Council homeworlds. On Nexus Prime, the remaining Council members gathered for what they knew would be their last meeting. Without Vorthka's leadership, the alliance was falling apart. "The humans are demanding we meet them in the old chambers," reported Yethra. "They want a formal surrender ceremony." Admiral Kethmore laughed bitterly. "They want to humiliate us in the same place where we banished them." "Perhaps we deserve it," said Dr. Velthara quietly. We created this situation through our own fear and prejudice. The surrender ceremony took place exactly 50 years after humanity's trial. Captain Jake Morrison walked slowly into the council chambers, supported by a walking stick, but still dignified. Behind him came Admiral Rodriguez, Empress Chen, and the other leaders of the human empire. The once mighty council chamber looked small and empty now. Only 7 of the 12 species had representatives present. The others had already fled to distant worlds or allied themselves with humanity. Jake stood at the same spot where Ambassador Lisa Carter had faced judgment half a century ago. But now the positions were reversed. 50 years ago, you told us we were too dangerous for civilized space, Jake said, his voice carrying to every corner of the chamber. You were right, we were dangerous, but not in the way you thought. He gestured to the human officers standing behind him. We were dangerous because we refused to accept limits. Dangerous because we turned our exile into opportunity. Dangerous because we became everything you feared we might become. Council member Yethra stepped forward, representing what remained of the old alliance. Captain Morrison, on behalf of the former Galactic Council, we formally surrender. We ask only that you show mercy to our civilian populations. Jake nodded. The civilians will be protected, but the Council is dissolved. In its place, humanity offers membership in the Terran Federation, an alliance of equals under human leadership. And if we refuse, asked Admiral Kethmore, then you remain free to govern your own worlds, but you will have no voice in galactic affairs, Jake replied. The choice is yours. One by one, the Council species accepted membership in the new Federation. Even Admiral Kethmore's proud hegemony eventually joined, recognizing that isolation meant irrelevance. Dr. Amy Sullivan, now over 100 years old but still brilliant, stood in the archives on Earth. She was writing the final chapter of humanity's greatest story, the journey from a single world to masters of multiple galaxies. How did we do it? Asked her young assistant, Dr. Billy Carter, grandson of the old ambassador. Amy smiled as she looked at the historical records spread before her. We did what humans always do when pushed to the edge, she said. We adapted, we survived, and we came back stronger than anyone thought possible. The story of the exile was over, but Amy knew it was really just the beginning. Human children across 1,000 worlds were already looking toward the spaces between galaxies, wondering what new challenges awaited them there. In the deepest archives, classified reports spoke of signals detected from beyond the galactic rim. The architects, the ancient builders whose technology had made human expansion possible, were sending messages from the vast emptiness between galaxy clusters. They were coming home. President Karen Foster stood on the observation deck of the new Terran Federation headquarters, built in orbit around Earth. Through the vast windows she could see human ships coming and going, carrying trade goods and colonists to worlds spanning 3 galaxies. What's next? Asked her aide, pointing to a report about the architect's signals. Karen smiled as she watched Earth turn slowly below them. The blue world that had birthed humanity now served as the capital of an empire stretching across the cosmos. Next, we prepare for whatever comes, she said. That's what humans do. We prepare, we adapt, and we survive. And when new challenges arise, we meet them head-on. The exile that was meant to destroy humanity had instead forged them into something the galaxy had never seen. Now, as masters of the stars, they faced the future with the same courage that had carried them through their darkest hour. The banished had become the rulers. The refugees had become the empire. And somewhere in the vast darkness between galaxies, ancient powers were stirring, drawn by the impossible story of a species that had turned exile into conquest. The human story was far from over, it was just beginning.